So if you all just want to scan that and make sure you get your attendance. And I think we'll wait until about 1:33 and then get started.
How'd you get it?
Okay, we can get started. Make sure everyone has scanned the attendance. Oh, wait, someone just came in. I'm going to let Jillian scan this. Okay, perfect. We can move on. So today we are doing building a camera and cinematography, doing a lot more sort of on the technical side. Last semester, we focused just more on the tasks of a cinematographer / DP. And we've talked a little bit, especially in our directing meeting, about shot lists. So that kind of covered it as well. So this is going to be more of a technical side. And our woman of the week is Kirsten Johnson, who I love. She is one of my favorite cinematographers, especially female cinematographers. She really focuses a lot on documentary work and is very known for being camera operators on a lot of documentaries, as well as actually creating her own films. Camera Person is a really good documentary. Me and Emily both watched that for our documentary class. And it basically was a culmination of all of the films she'd worked on, as well as like kind of home videos she'd done, combine them all together. And it wasn't even like a story. It was just like the life of being the person behind the camera. And it was super interesting because then it made me want to watch all the documentaries that like were in the movie. So I would completely recommend that film. She's worked on mostly feature-length documentaries that really do focus on social issues, especially ones on like female issues around the world. And yeah, I would definitely recommend checking her out. She's someone I definitely look up to and aspire to be because I'm super interested in documentary, but she's also just a really cool person and someone you can look out for in terms of like her camera work and the influence she's made in the industry, especially as a woman. So we have a guest speaker, Felicia, here today. She's going to talk more about cinematography, as she is a knowledgeable person about that. And she has a nice slideshow, so I'm going to get out of here and go to her slideshow and then hand it over to her. Go for it, Felicia.
Hi guys, my name is Felicia. I go by the she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a junior VMA student, kind of concentrating more in cinematography, and this is my presentation. So, you want to learn cinematography. Quick show of hands. You can raise your hand with the little emoji button if you'd like. Who here wants to become a cinematographer or is interested in cinematography? Very cool, very cool. Another quick show of hands. Who here has been made to feel that cinematography is too complex to learn? Yeah, no, I had the same thing when I was like getting into it. I was very intimidated, very scared, but something that I want to do with this presentation is to show you that, yes, there's a lot of nuts and bolts to cinematography, but it's nothing you all can't learn with a bit of practice and dedication. And I know all of you are very competent and capable of becoming really wonderful cinematographers. Okay, so today we're going to talk about fundamentals of the working camera. So we're going to go over ISO, shutter speed, aperture and depth of field kind of coincides with that, exposure and contrast ratios for lighting, color temperature, building a shoulder rig, which is very fun, it's not scary, working with a monitor and forming a shot list. And, I have a little GIF here on the side to the right that says, "You got this, girl," because you guys all got this. All right, so we're going to start it off with ISO. So ISO is a setting within your camera that allows you to brighten an image through how the sensor interacts with light. So as you raise the ISO within your camera, your image will become brighter, but also as you raise the ISO, you're going to come into contact with something called grain, or we call it noise as well. So if you look at the top right here, there's an ISO of 200. You can't really see very much like grain. It's very clear, very like concrete. And then with the ISO 3200, you get a little bit more noise, a little bit more grain. So within every camera, there's a native ISO, which is the highest amount of ISO that you can go up to before there's grain or noise within your image. With a lower native ISO too, as well, if you're shooting in like a darker or dimmer space, make sure that you have a lot of lights on standby to properly expose your image. And then I guess you can go above the ISO for stylistic purposes to get a grainier image or noise within your frame. So if you wanted to do like, let's say if you wanted to emulate kind of more of like a film stocky look, you could go above the ISO and get that grain, that noise, kind of a cooler image, and maybe like raise the color temperature to a warmer tone. There's a lot of different things you can do stylistically, but I do encourage you to stick within the native just while you're learning so that you can learn the fundamentals.
I have a quick question, Felicia, and I know this came up
Sure.
a little bit in my directing class a few days
Mhm.
ago, but my teacher was saying it depends on what camera you're working on for how much noise there's going to be in your ISO. Is that true?
That is very true. So each camera has a native ISO. So let's say, like, for example, the C100 has a native ISO of 800, right? So that means that if you go above the 800 of the native, then you're going to get kind of a little bit of noise, a little bit of grain. So it's going to diminish that quality. With a Sony A7S Mark II, the ISO is insane. So you can go relatively high up and then you won't have to deal with as much grain or noise. It's fantastic for low lighting shooting. I highly recommend that if you want to do like a darker alley scene or something spookier. All right, and we got shutter speed. So shutter speed is the speed at which the camera shutter opens and closes, playing with the amount of light that interacts with the sensor. So every camera has a shutter, and that's kind of coincides the frames per second. So as the shutter closes and shuts at a specific amount of seconds, it lets a certain amount of light in. So if you have the higher shutter speed, less light gets in and the darker the image will become, but it's also sharper for the image quality. So if you're capturing, let's say like you wanted to get dogs running in the park and you wanted it to be very, very clear, you could get a higher shutter speed and then you could get a picture of the dog running and then have all of its like paws off the ground because it's that quick. And then with a lower shutter speed, more light interacts with the sensor, brightening the image, and the image becomes blurred. And this can be used for stylistic purposes as seen below. There's an image in a still from Wong Kar-wai's Chungking Express. I highly recommend this movie. It plays around with shutter speed a lot. It's very beautiful, and I just love Wong Kar-wai, so I always recommend his movies. And then also, important thing to know, there's an 180-degree shutter rule. So whenever you're shooting, make sure your shutter speed is double the frame rate. So for example, if you have 30 frames per second, you must have a 1/60 shutter speed to keep that continuous naturalistic type of filming. So another example would be if you're doing 24 frames per second, you should have a 1/48 shutter speed. Unless you want it to look different stylistically, you can lower that shutter speed for a Chungking Express kind of look, or if you wanted to go above, the motion would become a little bit more like strangely fluid. I don't know how to describe it, but it's a lot quicker because of the shutter going quickly. All right, and aperture. This is very important. So aperture is not actually in conjunction to the camera body itself, but rather the lens that attaches to the camera. So each lens has a hole where the light travels in. which is seen kind of throughout the diagram here. And most lenses come with a wide range of apertures that can span from like f1.4, which is a very, very wide aperture, to f22, which is a very small aperture. So with the lower the aperture, the more light reacts to the sensor and the shallower the depth of field in the image. You might be asking, what is a depth of field within an image? So basically what it is when you have a lower aperture and more light comes in, you're going to have less things in focus. So your subject is going to be in focus, but the background around them is very, very blurred. So it's kind of more of like if you're getting a portrait of someone, you could do a shallower focus and then have them all the subject in focus. With a deeper depth of field, everything is in focus. So if you're looking at like an f22, so the smaller the aperture, if you go up in terms of the aperture, like an f22, and the smaller the hole, you're gonna get more in focus. So you would have the subject and the house in focus with a deeper depth of field. So that's good to know if you're doing like a wide shot and you want to get someone walking down a field. You could get everything in focus through that. And then I guess, yeah, I think that's good for this page. All right, lenses and their different functions. This is really fun. So a telephoto lens is a lens that kind of cramps space. So like if you had a subject that was farther away from the camera, it would actually bring them closer. And it also just like cramps, like, let's say there's like a hill and a lighthouse by them, like way, way, way in the distance. It's going to bring that closer in terms of the image. And I generally say like a good telephoto range should be like 70 millimeters and up. You can definitely play a lot with that. Some wide angle lenses elongate space, so it's a lot wider. So if you're shooting in a cramped space, like I highly recommend that for like an eerier kind of, more larger kind of feel within your image. 10 millimeters we would call like kind of more of a super wide, because it's very, very, very wide. And then 35 millimeters is a pretty decent wide, kind of in between like a 50 and like a 20. Like it's relatively good. Prime lenses are also really great. Prime lenses are lenses that have one focal length. So like, for example, the lens would be dedicated to like a 20 millimeter. And it would just be of that focal length. Typically, these lenses are a lot clearer just because of that one focal length. And generally, you'll see a lot of like cine lenses that are primes that have like aperture rings, so you can change the aperture on the lens and the focus on the lens as well. So these are super, super helpful. I have a couple primes. Zoom lenses are really cool as well. If any of you guys have seen Jaws, there's that one scene where like the shark is on the beach, everyone is scared, and then the like main character, his image kind of like gets compressed and it's moving, right? So with a zoom lens, you can capture that kind of image by doing a dolly zoom. So you would move the camera back or forward. You can do both ways. And then you can move the millimeters of the lens to get that image. So zoom lenses typically have a wide range. So they have, 20 millimeters to 100 millimeters. So it would go from a wide to a telephoto. And that's how we get that compression of space. And then macro lenses are really great. I actually have a macro lens. I love it to bits and pieces because it gets all the little details in the image. Mine is 135 millimeters. It's also a prime. But basically, with a macro lens, you can get the very, very finite details of the image. Like if you wanted to get the hairs off of someone's sweater, for example, you could just take a shot of it and it gets every little detail and it's perfect. Or if you want to take shots of bugs or like leaves or nature, very fun tool to have in your kit. Standard lenses. Standard lenses are basically the lenses that people have on standby in sets for the most part. 35 millimeter, 50 millimeter, which is kind of replicates the naked eye, as one would say. It kind of just replicates how we normally see. And then, you could have like telephotos on standby for a standard lens, like a 70 or an 85. Like that's typically what I've seen. And then we have our specialty lenses. Fisheye, which kind of like creates a strange distorted bulge, kind of replicating what you would think that like it would be like to like be in a fishbowl yourself and kind of observe the world. And then tilt shift is a really cool lens. I haven't seen it used very often, but it basically plays with subjects and objects. And let's say you had like a very small pin, right? And then you had a human on the other side, right? It would basically make the pin and the human the same size through that kind of lens. It's very strange, but it's very cool. If you're doing a surrealist piece, I definitely recommend it. I love them. Infrared lenses are really cool as well. They play with kind of the light and the polarization of the image and then creates a lot of distortions and a lot of different colors and kind of weird things within your image. And then last, please take care of your lenses. If you have lenses, they're very expensive. They are not cheap. And they're kind of, you know, the most important part of the camera in my opinion, because that's where you get your image. So always properly clean your lenses. So having the proper supplies, so like having like cleaning solution, a cloth on standby, and then there's little kind of squishy air cushions where you can get all the fibers and dust off of the lens. And then another great way to check your lenses is using a flashlight on the bottom portion of your lens and the top portion of your lens to see if there's any scratches or like just kind of like divots in your lens to make sure it's doing well. All right, exposure. This is also super important. Exposure works in conjunction with the ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. When you're getting an accurate read for exposure, always use a light meter to get that accurate reading on your subject or just in the light in the environment around them or in the constructed world. A very important thing to know is contrast ratio, which is something that's used a lot in cinematography. So a way to think about it is there are different gradients of light present within an image. As a cinematographer, something that you need to be aware of is there are stop differences in light within the frame of the style you wish to emulate. So, for example, you could have a fill light be a 5-stop difference, and then your hair light and backlight be a 1-stop difference in order to give definition to your image. If you look to the top image, with the woman who's like looking into the frame. Basically, her key is an f11, her fill's a f2.0, and then her hair is an f8 and her back is an f8. The reason why we have all these gradients is because if we had them all at the same exposure, it would be very flat. So we wouldn't have much of an image. This gives it a little bit more definition, a little bit more for the filmmaker to play with, and also just it makes the image look a lot better. And then on the bottom, this is me playing with stylism in film. Basically, this is a still from Uncle Boonmee Who Can Recall His Past Lives, which is a fantastic movie that uses underexposure very stylistically, and it's very beautiful, and I highly recommend that you watch it because it's a great way to study underexposure within film. All right, and then we have color temperature. This one's a fun one. So there are two different types of lighting. You have your tungsten at 3200 Kelvin and daylight, which is at a 5600 Kelvin. When you're shooting inside, 3200 Kelvin is the general accurate color temperature, and 5600 Kelvin is the general for shooting outside, but do make adjustments given the circumstance of your environment. It's not always that consistent. For example, if you're shooting outside, and we kind of have overcast weather right now a little bit, but for example, if you wanted to shoot today, and you know we had like overcast and kind of clouds, it's like not quite a very clear blue day, you could shift from a 5600 Kelvin to a 6500 Kelvin to give it that naturalistic look. But with like most functions with color temperature, you can play with the color temperature for stylistic purposes, but always try to stick to an accurate reading in the beginning just so you can get that mastery of it and understand why you're making the choices that you're making. For example, on the bottom, some really good uses of color temperature. Amelie is a really cool movie. It's something that I also recommend. On the bottom, you can see that the image is a lot more warm, kind of orangey yellow. So the color temperature was played with for a stylistic purpose there. And then on the right side, we have more of a bluer frame, kind of emulating more of a stylistic purpose as well. And I just think this movie is very great for studying color temperature and the different uses. All right, building a shoulder rig. I actually know a lot of people are very scared to build a shoulder rig initially, but it's not as scary as you would think it is. It just looks very intimidating. Um, it's kind of like building Legos, which is fun. I don't know if you guys enjoy that, but it's really wonderful. Basically, a way to build a shoulder rig is you have all your pieces and equipment in the top. What I would do first, or how I usually build it, is I grab the two rods, and then I grab the base plate. And when I do that, I slide the base plate in the middle of the two poles, and then I fasten it with the red knob on the left side. And then second, uh, there's a plate that is usually on the top of the base plate. So you would detach the top of the base plate, and then you attach that plate to your camera, and then you would screw that in with a multi-tool or a screwdriver. And then after you do that, you put that plate onto the base plate and you slide it in until you hear a click. And that's how you know that it's locked in. Always make sure to wiggle your camera just a little bit to make sure that it is snug and in place. You don't want that sliding anywhere. And then next you would grab your sleeve and matte box. So your sleeve and matte box are the two little images on the bottom. So what you would do is you would grab your sleeve, you'd put it on the top portion of your lens, and then you make sure that's really nice and snug. And then you would grab the outer ring of the matte box, so the circle portion of it, and you would put the other side of the sleeve on top of that, making sure that there is no light coming in through that configuration. And then you would slide the matte box onto the poles. You fasten that in. And then another thing that's important to know about the matte box is we have it solely because we don't want a lot of lens flares or glares. So it keeps everything very consistent. So if you're shooting in the daytime, there's no light shining in and kind of messing with the lens in the image. Another great reason why we have that matte box is because we can put special effects filters in it, like a dream filter, or we can do polarizers to take it down, take the image down 2 stops if you want to film a shallower depth of field in a very, very bright sunny day, for example. And then at the end, you're going to want to get your front handle and your shoulder plate, and you're going to want to attach them one at a time. And you get the front handles and you push them in, and then you fasten with the little knob on the left side, and then you get your shoulder plate and you slide that on the back, and then you fasten that as well. And that is how you build a shoulder rig. It's not as scary as everyone would make it out to be. And you guys got it. All right, using a monitor, another scary one. I'm gonna teach you guys how to kind of make sure everything is nice and snug in place. So the first thing you would do is properly secure your articulating arm to the top part of your camera by sliding it in and fastening the bolt. So your articulating arm is that lower piece right there. Yep. And the way you would attach it is there's a little hook at the top of your DSLR. And so you would slide the articulating arm into the little hook, and then you would fasten it with the little silver bolt on the top and make sure that it's nice and snug and that it's not going anywhere. Because if you're filming like this with your shoulder rig and that slides, it hurts and it's not fun. It has happened to me. I am talking out of experience. And then once you have that articulating arm nice and snug on the top, you're going to attach your monitor. And so there's a little screw on the top of your articulating arm, and you're just going to fasten the monitor by screwing it on, and then fasten until it is very secure and nice and snug and fit onto that articulating arm. Once you have that configured, in the back of your monitor are places for LP batteries. And LP batteries are small, kind of rectangular. They're about this size. They're pretty nice. They're pretty cool. And then you would slide them into the back until you hear a little click. And then once you hear that click, you know they're very much secure into your monitor and they will not go anywhere. Next is attaching a proper HDMI cable from your monitor to your camera. And a very, very important note to make is that the HDMI cable can vary from camera to camera. So you might not always have a normal HDMI to HDMI cable. You might have to buy an HDMI cable to mini HDMI cable. So like with this, for example, if you look on the side, there's kind of the normal HDMI cord in the beginning, and then there's the little tiny mini HDMI. So this one uses a HDMI to mini HDMI. So it's always important to know what your camera has before you shoot. So keep that in mind when using a monitor. Within your monitor, you have many different features you can play around with. I always recommend zebra and peaking to see how to properly expose or focus your image. So with zebra, that one is more dedicated to exposure. If your image is overexposed, you're going to see kind of lines configuring down on your image over what's overexposed. So that lets you know, yes, I need to darken my image a little bit more. And then with peaking, that's all related to focus. So with peaking, it's basically like having a red outline over your subject to let you know like what's in focus. The best way to get focus on a subject though is to make sure that the little like light in their eye is red with the peaking. That's how you know everything's in focus. It's a great way to figure that out. All right, last but not least, forming a shot list. So it's always important to label the essentials, so like lens, angle, movement, equipment. This is all stuff that you need to know like going on to set so that you can bring just the right amount of equipment and not bring too much to the set, just so like it's all very like figured out before you go on. And then while making a shot list, it's always important to talk with your director and collaborate communicatively to make sure you're both on the same page. So when you're with the director, you want to definitely make sure that they get the style that they want and that it looks perfectly to what they envision, but also make sure it's a little bit of your own style and your own voice, because that's very important with cinematography, because you are the one with the camera. And they did hire you for your skills and abilities. So always make sure that a little bit of you is in that project. All right, and thank you guys so much for having me for this Women in Motion meeting. It's such an honor. I love this org so much. And it's so wonderful to meet all of you. If you have any further questions or need cinematography help, I left my email and my phone number, just so if you need, like, there are no stupid questions, basically. If you have any questions, please ask me. I always love helping women who want to go into tech. So yeah, this has been really wonderful. Thank you guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Now we just want to open it up. If anyone has any specific questions, this is the best time to ask, especially very pointed questions of like, I tried this, it didn't work. What's the problem? Does anyone have any questions that you'd like to ask Felicia specifically? Okay, well, I have a question. I'm taking intro to film production, which obviously is like different. That's using film cameras. And I was like, oh, this is gonna like solidify my knowledge of like Aperture and all of that. And I feel like it's not doing that, which has disappointed me. So I'm wondering what's like I know when I'm on a camera, like when I adjust things, like what it looks like. And I feel like I'm less of like the methodical person of like, I need to remember all these numbers. But I feel like that's something that going into the industry and especially going into camera, I want to learn and be able to just like call out an f-stop or call out a shutter speed and know exactly what I'm talking about. How would you recommend learning that better or sticking that in my brain more effectively?
Sure. So something that I did, because I was always very curious about cameras, is at a young age I started to take photography, and I wanted to try things very different because for me I've always been like a huge fan of surrealism and very, very like strange technical kind of, I guess, like filming or photography. So for me, I was always searching up on like, I guess, like YouTube or just the internet, like how can I emulate a certain style. So it's very much playing around with cameras and lenses and like learning like what focal length works with what image and what you want to kind of prepare. In addition to that, like definitely like experiment on your own, but also I did a lot of assistant camera work before doing a lot of DP work. So through assistant camera work, I kind of bugged every single DP that I worked with, asking them 3 million questions about like what I should be doing and like why they were making choices that they were making, in conjunction to like why they had specific lights plotted for a reason. Because I knew very much that like lighting and camera work were so like connected, so to say. So I would definitely recommend exploring on your own, but also going on sets, hopping on and getting that like hands-on experience is so fundamental because I've learned more through that than in Emerson film classes, strangely enough. So highly recommend that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I was on a set a couple weekends ago where I was assisting camera and I realized I knew more than the DP. And I was like, well, I guess this makes me feel good, but also that's concerning. So I definitely, yeah, agree getting on set hands-on practice. Cause I feel like over and over again, I'm always like showed these diagrams and told these things. And I'm like, I don't know if I know it. But then when I get put in the positions, I do know it. So I think maybe it's also a confidence thing. Anyone
Mhm.
else have any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I guess one question I have, because like, we're about to sign up for classes and stuff. Do you have any recommendations for like classes to take if you're interested in cinematography?
Oh yeah, 100%. I took basic cinematography with a wonderful professor named Jordan West. I will literally hype them up to the max. I literally love them so much. Uh, they taught me so much. But in addition, another thing that I just thought of that's super helpful, for learning cinematography, I work at the soundstage, and that's basically a job where you're trained to learn equipment and you're trained to learn how cameras function. I highly recommend going out for that job position because if you do that, you'll learn so much. I learned more there in my classes as well. But if you want to take some courses that are kind of cinematography related, there's basic cinematography and then there's advanced cinematography. So those two would be great. Joey's a really great advanced cinematography teacher as well. Joey Colby, I think. Yeah, he's really awesome.
Also, I would say intro to film, even though I said like I haven't learned as much. I think that that has like made me realize like, okay, I understand because you have to do everything manually. There's no automatic functions on the
Oh
Bullets
yeah.
at all. So
Oh yeah.
I think it's a good way to be like, okay, I can actually see these numbers and like go to it. And I would recommend Peter Flynn for that class for
Oh,
sure.
he's lovely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love Peter Flynn.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, to kind of back up what Emily's saying, like I completely agree. Working with a film camera is totally different than working with a digital camera because it's less straightforward and it's very much like you don't know what your film looks like until it develops. I did not take the intro to film for Emerson because I transferred from Ithaca College, so I took a film course there. But I definitely agree that like you learn a lot about exposing your image through using film, but you also learn a lot more about like the fundamentals through kind of playing around with it. It's much more of an anxiety provoking kind of filming, but it's definitely something that I think you should try. It's awesome.
Do you have any favorite cameras that you've worked with? Like if someone were to ask you to DP on a project, what camera would you gravitate towards?
Ooh, okay. I've tried a bunch of different ones. I've tried like the Arri Alexa, Sony A7S Mark II, different Black Magics, and like the C100, C300. Um, there's a lot of different functions that each camera brings. Like, for example, Sony A7S Mark II in the Blackmagic series, really great for ISO. You can go up really, really high. Canon, I know, has a really good bit rate for color. So if you wanted to get really colorful images, Canon has a more naturalistic, less compressed kind of look. And that's kind of in contrast to the Sony A7S Mark II, where like the bit rate is compressed for color. So you're not going to get kind of that same colorful look that Canon has. Like that's why there's kind of like a fight between Canon lovers and Sony lovers. I've also used the Sony FS5 too, which is better for documentary work. But if I had to pick cameras that I liked the most, I think Sony 7S Mark II and the Blackmagic series are definitely two that I would gravitate more towards.
Awesome. Anyone else have any other questions at all? Okay, I have another one. I guess I just am very question filled today or something. How have you combated working as like a DP or in the camera department as a woman? Because I know I have been facing a lot of hate for that from certain people recently. So have you had any experiences? How have you overcome them? Any fun stories? We'd love to hear.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, like, I feel like it's something that's completely like unavoidable when you're a woman in tech. There is a lot of sexism on set, as you all probably know. It is unfortunate and it very much sucks. However, I can give you an instance that was not so great with a DP that I was working with. Basically, this DP was very, very rude to me and assumed that I didn't really know anything. And then was very hard to communicate with. Like, he wasn't very clear on his instructions, and he decided it would be better to have a $40,000 camera build on the ground rather than in my hands. So I was, because we had a whole G&E team moving around, and he didn't put it in a space that was very safe for that camera build. So something that I did was I just picked up the camera and I stared at him, and I didn't stop staring at him. And he just looked at me, and I'm like, you do not put a 40,000 camera build on the ground. I'm like, I'm going to hold this until we need to use it again. And I'm like, you're not going to do that. I also had a talk with him about the way he was treating me in a very calm and civilized manner, because I'm not one to be dramatic on set. And I was like, hey, like, I really don't appreciate the time or the way that you're treating me during the time that I'm giving you. Like, it was a 12-hour set, Saturday, Sunday for 2 weeks. So I was spending so much time only to be treated with disrespect. So after I opened that communication with him, he started to treat me more respectfully. I think something really important to combat with sexism you experience on set is to be very communicative about how you feel in a very calm manner that doesn't quite antagonize the person that you're talking to. I think communication is key for like anything on set, but I think when you're dealing with something like that, you have to just say, like, you made me feel like this. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it isn't fair to treat me like this when I'm here to help you. So definitely open up communication. If someone like goes up to you and they're like, oh, like, I didn't know women were logical enough to do camera work. I've had that said to me. You just look them in the eyes and you say, oh, really? I mean, why would you think that? You have to question them back. You don't let them get away with something like that. You just don't. It's just rude. Women are just as confident as men, and that is something that they sometimes do not understand. But yeah, it's just go onto set, treat everyone with respect, treat everyone with kindness. Don't, like, if someone doesn't know something, like if you're working with an AC, always say, like, it's okay, I was in the same position as you and I'm happy to help you learn. Like, always see people as your equal on set. Like, no matter what they know, what they don't know, it's so important to treat people like people. you know
Absolutely. And I feel like I've talked about this before, but I've definitely felt like a lot of times when you're a woman in tech, it's hard. It's like you get a lot of roadblocks a lot of times, but you got to keep going. Like, you got to keep moving. You have to be that person who breaks down those roadblocks. Otherwise, we're all going to be stuck behind them. So I definitely commend you for being able to talk with someone, especially when they're, being sexist or being rude, and having that calm demeanor and being able to communicate is something we can definitely take away. Anyone else have any other questions before we wrap up the meeting? Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much, Felicia, for coming. I'm just going to put up the last slides just for upcoming events that we have, but round of applause for Felicia. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So for our last event, this is pertaining to anyone who's doing Athena Film Festival. Just want to let you all know it is our last week of the festival, so please don't forget to attend panels, Q&As, screenings, all the fun stuff that you have access to for the month of March. We're getting down to the end of the month when everything will not be accessible anymore. So please make sure to take all advantages of that as well. We also may be getting some merch for our film festival attendees, so that would be something to look out for, as well as if any of you came to the alumni event last night, which was so much fun. We had an amazing time. We'll also be probably getting some merch for that, and also hopefully getting the emails for some of those women, just so we can stay in contact with them and have them as a resource for all of you who came to it, because it was so awesome. I like one of the best nights of my life, I must say. Anyways, thank you so much everyone for coming to the meeting, and we will see you all next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Have a good weekend.